Welcome back to episode 29 of our podcast. Today, we're going to wrap up Baroque instrumental music by talking about the French Overture and listening to our final piece by Bach called Orchestral Suite Number 3 in D. And then we're going to wrap up this instrumental music of the Baroque period with the court orchestras of Japan. Next episode, we're going to start talking about Baroque vocal music. So let's jump into talking about the French Overture. A dance suite begins not with the first dance, but with a special preparatory number called a French Overture. Overture is, of course, a general term for any substantial piece of music introducing a play, opera, or ballet. The French Overture was a special type developed by the court orchestra of Louis XIV, designed to symbolize the pomp and majesty of his court. Even after the French Overture style had become antiquated, it was kept alive for the benefit of lesser rulers who apt everything associated with the Sun King. The French Overture consists of two sharply contrasted sections, an A section and a faster B section. They are typically arranged in an A, B, A prime pattern, where A prime stands for a variant, often an abbreviated variant, of A. The slow A section is the one that is distinctively French. Dotted rhythms, sweeping scales, and heavy accents, and other such features give it a majestic, pompous gravity that is easily recognized and was easily imitated. This section was typically labeled with the French word grave, or grave. The fast B section is in imitative polyphony. In some overtures, this section amounts to a full scale fugue. So we're going to check one of these out with Johann Sebastian Bach's Orchestral Suite Number 3 in D. It is thought that Bach wrote this suite for the Collegium Musicum of the University of Leipzig, a student music organization that seems to have provided a congenial outlet for his later works. The suite in D is scored for the festive Baroque orchestra diagrammed previously. Strings, 2 oboes, 3 trumpets, 2 timpani, and harpsichord. Bach carefully varied the style of orchestration from number to number. This suite, like others written all over Europe, uses French titles as an acknowledgement of French leadership in ballet and dance. As I talk about the different parts of the suite, I will make it so that you hear my voice in the right speaker and the suite in the left speaker. You won't hear all of each music, but you can listen to what I say, and then you can go back and listen to the music or listen to both at the same time. So, let's jump in. First comes the overture. The French overture that starts the suite is scored for all the instruments, and in fact is the only movement in which the oboes have slightly independent parts and do not always double the violins. What is more, a solo violin emerges unexpectedly to dominate 2 passages during the B part of the overture, which is a full-scale fugue. The form of this overture is, like we talked about before, A, B, A prime. Shown here is the beginning of the A section, the grave, with its arresting drum roll and obligatory French dotted rhythms, and part of the fugal exposition in B. The episodes in this fugue are played by the solo violin in D. This B part of the movement can be understood in two ways: as a fugue with solo violin episodes, or as a Baroque concerto with a fugal ritornello. Following the overture comes 4 pieces in dance form. 3 of them follow the Baroque pattern of A repeating, B repeating. Notice the full stop effect after each playing of all the A's and B's. Only the gavotte and second of the dances has a trio, and so falls into the A-B-A, gavotte and trio form. So, let's move on to the air movement. Air is the French word for aria, and Bach composed this instrumental song in dance form, since it has to take its place in a dance suite. It is perhaps Bach's most famous and beloved melody. Only the strings and continuo play, as the quiet melody in the first violin is accompanied by a regular, downward-moving, soothing bass line in the cellos and bass viols. We've referred to this in the past as a walking bass. And there are subsidiary but highly expressive counterpoints in the second violin and violas. The exquisite fluidity of this melody is a function of its rhythmic variety that is set off by the regularity of the walking bass. Most of the basic 2-beat or half-measure units in the melody have rhythms not duplicated elsewhere. Therefore, when measures 13 to 14 do repeat a rhythmic figure several times, they gain a special kind of climactic intensity. This intensity is underpinned by quiet upward motion in the bass, which had generally been moving downward, and a newly prominent second violin part. Anticipated by some melodic figures in A, the figures in B keep reaching ever upward in a wonderfully spontaneous way. This sense of aspiration is balanced by the graceful falling cadences A and B. To counteract all the rhythmic and melodic variety, Bach puts in several beautiful sequences whose repetitive quality ensures a sense of organization. Here we see measures 3 and 4, 13, 14, and 15 to 16. Our next movement will be the gavotte, which we'll hear in just a moment. So what you hear now is still the end of the air as I introduce the gavotte, but I will actually play you the gavotte without me speaking over top of it. So during the gavotte, the wind instruments and timpani return in this number. The trumpets make this dance sound more like a march, as the festive orchestra evokes the military conquests that form the basis of Baroque princely power. Trumpets deliver the strong 2/4 note upbeat which characterizes the gavotte. Then Bach inverts the bold opening melody of A to obtain the opening of B. This inversion may look academic, a technical trick to be appreciated by the Collegium Musicum connoisseurs, but it sounds fresh and natural, another product of Bach's endless, fertile melodic imagination. We can see it here up on the screen. The trio, or second gavotte, also fully orchestrated, sounds even more military than the first. Strings and oboes play fanfares to begin both C and D. So, please enjoy the gavotte movement. And on the screen, you'll be directed as to which section is occurring in the music. Enjoy. The last two movements are the bourrée and gavotte. The bourrée is the lightest dance in the suite and is scored for full orchestra. You can hear it behind me speaking now. The wind instruments and timpani are used mainly to underscore the sharp, exhilarating moments. The jig starts with another drum roll, just as the French overture did, and launches the most common dance for the last movement of a suite. The violins, doubled by the oboes, play almost continuous eighth notes in 6/8 time as well. So let's move beyond Europe for a little bit and look at the court orchestra of Japan. Orchestras and political power. This is not a connection that we automatically make. Perhaps sitting in a darkened concert hall listening to a European-style orchestra like the Philadelphia Orchestra or the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. But if orchestra is defined a bit more broadly to include any large grouping of instrumentalists, the connection is clear enough in our society. We have all watched on TV as bands played one national anthem after another at the Olympic Games, or happened upon new footage of the Marine Corps band welcoming the president off Air Force One with a rendition of Hail to the Chief. In fact, the European orchestra first assumed a standardized makeup, something like its modern form, when it was used to display political grandeur at the court of French King Louis XIV in the late 17th century. There, the orchestra played for various ritualistic events, including elaborate costume ballets in which the king himself danced. Louis's court was the envy of all Europe, and other image-conscious rulers quickly moved to imitate his marvelous 24 violins. In Japan, a court orchestra with generally similar political significance had been established 1,000 years before Louis XIV. This was the period in Japanese history from the 6th century of the Common Era to the 8th, when the first centralized government of the islands was created. The new Japanese central government, many of its institutions, and even its newly constructed capital city of Nara were modeled on the greatest empire in Asia, China. In the process, many elements of Chinese culture were important to Japan, most importantly, perhaps, Buddhism, which had in turn been imported to China from India centuries before. The new Japanese court also imported various musical styles from continental Asia. These were altered and developed into an independent Japanese tradition, which came to play an important role in the court's ceremony and ritual. Altogether, these styles are known as gagaku, from Chinese characters meaning elegant music, though their sources are more than just Chinese. The gagaku repertory is divided into two parts. One, known as togaku, consists of music derived from Chinese styles, with ingredients from India and Southeast Asia as well. The other, komagaku, is made up of works of Korean and Manchurian origin. Further distinctions are made when gagaku accompanies dance, which is often the case, just as with European Baroque orchestral music. So let's talk a bit more specifically about the etenraku. Etenraku is the most famous work from the togaku repertory. Its name means music of divinity, and it emanates a deep, powerful calm associated with Buddhist contemplation. This is the oldest music we will hear, and it dates back almost to the origins of gagaku. The Togaku orchestra is so distinctive and so different from any European orchestra that we should spend a moment getting to know the various instruments. While European orchestras are dominated by strings, all gagaku orchestras are dominated by wind instruments. The instruments all have specific function. The sliding, wailing double reed hichiriki carries the main melody. Several are heard on the recording, playing together. The side-blown flute, called ryuteki, is the first instrument heard. It plays the melody along with the hichirikis, though in a slightly different version. Thus, it produces a heterophonic texture with the hichirikis. The sho, a mouth reed organ with several pipes, plays chordal clusters of tones derived from the main melody. This unusual instrument contributes a haunting background of harmonic haze to the texture. The kakko, a two-headed barrel drum played with sticks used for single strokes or short rolls. It is the first drum heard. A deep, larger barrel drum tsuri daiko marks off long phrases of the melody with two successive strokes, the first soft and the second louder. A biwa, or four-stringed lute, strums across several strings quickly, punctuating the melody. A gakuso, a zither with 13 strings, plays short motives, mainly of three notes related, again, to the melody. Both the biwa and the gakuso take a more and more active role as the performance proceeds, finally even playing some of the main melody. Every instrument has its place in the scheme. The piece as a whole is elaborated from a single melody according to a predetermined plan and without improvisation. This is typical of Japanese traditional music, but the melody is elaborate in a way that results in a complex texture composed of many distinct musical gestures. The form of this piece is determined in two ways that are characteristic of gagaku music. First, it is an ordered repetition of the different phrases that make up the melody. Intraku contains three of these phrases, labeled A, B, and C, in the music example and on the listening chart that we see on the page. Each phrase consists of 32 beats of music. They move by slowly at first and can be heard to discern, but as you get used to the melody, you will be able to follow their repetitions. The second important formal feature of this piece, and of much of Japanese traditional music, not only gagaku, is the quickening of a beat, a clear marking of the meter, and an increase in the musical activity as the performance proceeds. At first, while the flute alone carries the melody, the beats are very slow and flexible, so much of that the music seems almost to have no meter at all. When the double reed hichirikis enter, they play the melody along with the flute to a more even beat. Then, at the C phrase of the melody, the tsuri daiko doubles its pace, beating twice every 8 beats instead of every 16. Meanwhile, the tempo gradually quickens. The beats at the outset come every 2 to 3 seconds, while at the close they move by at about 1 per second. Even at this relatively quick tempo, however, the music never loses the sense of restraint. Virtuosic playing is strictly avoided. Intraku's aura of quiet, inward-looking Buddhist contemplation characterizes the gagaku repertoire as a whole. And with that, we've come to the end of another podcast. I know this one was a bit longer, but I really wanted to share with you some musics from outside of Europe. So next time, we're going to abandon Baroque instrumental music and go and learn about Baroque vocal music. Of course, there's going to be a big focus on opera because, as we spoke about before, opera was all the rage. We'll also discuss oratorio, which is like opera, only instead of it having costumes and acting, it is merely sung. We'll then look at the church cantata as well as the organ chorale before traveling back to Japan a little bit to learn a little bit about kabuki and Japanese drama. So, until next time, cheers.